Okay, it's recording now. Somebody actually asked me a question about this recently. I was thinking of doing it live on Facebook, but instead of doing it live on Facebook, I'm just going to record it so that I have the video and then I can send it as an answer. Somebody asked me a question about this recently, so I want to be able to have a class to be able to send it to him. All right, feel free to ask any questions or make any comments or observations. Starting off, I'm assuming you're all familiar with the concept that we are created in the image of God. Yeah. Anyone want to shout out first what we think that means before I start guiding you through it? The more I understand what you understand of it, the more I know how to approach it. Don't be shy.
What? Sorry, was that a question or a rhetorical?
Your first impressions or in a nutshell,
I think there's a very early on Bible quote from one of the first couple of chapters which says man was created in the image of God and he created them, something like
that. Good. So what does it mean?
It means it's a tough one, actually. I think I used to know the answer. I don't actually know the answer now, so it'd be good to find out.
There's no such thing as the answer in Judaism.
Oh, rookie mistake, yeah.
In Judaism, we believe in your answer rather than the answer.
Perhaps my answer, in which case, might be that it means that there is something good in all of us, I would say.
Okay.
By nature, God is good. That's very clearly defined and laid out. And I think that if we're created in the image of God, that you can't have a person or a human being that isn't good in that way.
Very good. Very good. Do you think that that's accurate description of every human being who was ever created?
Well,
I'm just trying to stir the pot because you brought this up.
You can say that every human being. You can say that every human being has good inside of them, whether they're good or not. That they've got the potential to be good, whether or not they do bad things.
That's lovely. You saved me, mate. Cheers.
No worries.
Articulate. So even Hitler had redeeming factors.
I was gonna say even Hitler was a vegetarian. So I mean, maybe he had a dog as well. Lovely little dog. Wonder what happened to him.
I was once listening to a rabbi talking about evil, and he's speaking about he had just come back from Auschwitz, taking a group to Auschwitz, and he says Hitler was evil. The Sonderkommandant of Auschwitz was evil. Your mother-in-law, just a really tough person to get along with. All right. Anyone else want to contribute quickly to their thoughts on created in the image of God before we take this further? Guy, what does it mean to you? Don't be shy.
I remember learning this in GCSE JS, but apart from that, my memory of that is kind of gone. I don't really remember.
Goes back to my point that in GCSE JS they don't have a method to make the answer resonate with you so much that it becomes your own answer.
Yeah.
So it's an answer that I have to put on a paper.
I kind of agree with Ben that it's just everyone has good in them and it's up to them whether they use it or not.
Amazing. All right, so let's explore it. Let's get into it. So Ben quoted our great Bible scholar.
That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah, let us make Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. So this is day 6 of creation. All other creations are created already. This is the final part of creation. The end of day number 6. Everything else is created. And now God says, let us make man in our image. If I remember, I haven't incorporated it in the PowerPoint. I did want to actually edit and put towards the end a comment about our image. Who's God talking to? Let us make man in our image. Plural. Famous question about what that means, but we'll see how we go. After our likeness, and they shall rule over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the heaven, over the animals and over all the earth, and over all the creeping things that creep upon the earth. Which means that if you read this verse carefully, you see that there seems to be an association between being created in the image of God and being a ruler over the rest of creation. Dominance, control. I will add that in Judaism, dominance and control doesn't mean dictatorship. It means responsibility. Do other times we do topics on leadership. In Judaism, leadership is very much about servitude. The very famous thing about Moses being told, I'm not giving you dominance, I'm giving you servitude by your leadership. So leadership and control and rulership is empowerment to positivity. So it wouldn't be a contradiction to your interpretation of that it means being good, because being a ruler and being good don't have to be a contradiction. In fact, in Judaism, they're not a contradiction at all. Yeah. All right. Verse 27. It's the next verse of the same thing, of the same chapter. God created man in his image. Suddenly the us is gone. In the image of God, he created him, the human being. Male and female, he created them. We could spend a half an hour talking about the use of, in Hebrew, of Adam. Most of you are familiar enough with Hebrew to know that Adam in Hebrew is not an exclusively masculine term. It's a masculine and feminine term, but just put into masculine grammar, if you want. Yeah, there's a lot in Hebrew language and linguistics about the fact that when you're talking about man and woman together, but in singular terms, you're going to use a masculine terminology just because of language, not because man is seen as dominant necessarily. There's a lot of it in that. Somebody was asking me recently why God created man first. According to the Talmud, man wasn't created first. According to the Talmud, the first man originally was masculine and feminine, was a combination of two, and then God separated it, becoming male and female. Do you know that?
I've heard that sort of story before, yeah. I've never really made sense of it. It's kind of, yeah.
From a biological perspective, I don't know. There's no chart in the NHS that showed the depiction of a being that was created that was both male and female, and then God sliced it in half, whatever that is.
I've got a question about that. Since he made all the other animals in the days beforehand, then surely he knew the difference, or not knew the difference, but you have male and female, I don't know, lions or elephants, for example. So why does it differ with humans?
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. So this is discussed extensively on why is it that God chose to make the human with a very different structure, empowering the human being to see birth not just as a natural phenomenon of their being, but as a divine empowerment. The animals were created initially as separate, as male and female for reproductive purposes. So they're separate, and their job is just to continue to be separate by reproducing. The human being is created very differently, and then God says, I'm going to change your dynamic and turn you into the ability to reproduce, which means that we're defined first and foremost by our partnership with God rather than our ability to reproduce.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There's a lot of that. Again, if I spend time elaborating on that, we'll probably never get through the topic, which is probably not a bad thing, to be distracted by good, thoughtful conversation. But let's see how we go with this. All right. And God blessed them, and God said to them, suddenly they are them. Have I dropped someone?
Yeah, Ben's internet's cut out, so he's going to come to my room.
No problem. Ooh. Well, you don't have the same internet.
He is on his extender, and I'm on the separate one. So,
all right. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, to rule over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the sky, and over all the beasts that tread upon the earth." So again, from verse 26, from verse 27 and 28 emphasizes the same theme that we saw in 26, which is that there seems to be a direct link between being created in the image of God and being fruitful and multiplying, populating the world, bringing our skills and our abilities of control and rulership over everything else in creation. Yeah, they seem to be directly linked. For the beginning of creation, we know that Adam was told not to eat meat. It was only after the flood that Noah is told that now they can eat meat. And the verse reads, when God is telling Noah you can eat meat, the prohibition against murder of human beings, as well as the prohibition of consuming human blood, is mentioned there. So this is Genesis chapter 9. This is already after the story of, towards the end of the story of Noah. Whoever sheds the blood of man, through man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God he made man. Which means if you look at this carefully, what it's saying, what it seems to be implying is that according to Judaism, the reason we don't kill human beings is not because it's not a nice thing to do, first and foremost. Could be it's not a nice thing to do as well. And you can give many layers of interpretation to why we don't kill human beings, but we might still be comfortable killing other creatures. This verse says that the reason why we don't kill human beings and why we don't spill a human blood is because the human being is created uniquely in the image of God. There's something divine about the human being. And because of that, you can't take a human's life. You see that? Yeah, it seems to be a very unique take on it, which is clearly in the text. All right, this is a quote from Mishnah Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, 1st, 2nd century Mishnah. Before we start reading it, I just want to introduce the fact that Mishnah, the word Mishnah, is the same Hebrew letters, if you juggle them around, as Nishama. Nishama means?
Soul.
Soul. So we're told actually that we should learn Mishnah in memory of the departed. So I actually want to dedicate the reading of this Mishnah in memory of the late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs. And I want to reflect on something before we read it, because a lot of people have been speaking about how Rabbi Sachs has impacted not just world Jewry, but the world as a scholar, as a writer, as a thinker. The main interviewer of Radio 4's religious thing that Rabbi Sachs was often on wrote, I don't think she's Jewish, I think it's a she. I read it earlier today very, very briefly. I just saw the headline of it. Wrote an article. How often do you have a non-Jewish radio producer writing an article about a rabbi who passed away? And she wrote a public article on her reflections of the impact, Rabbi Sachs' impact on the world. For me, Rabbi Sachs has taught me and so many other rabbis the skill of taking an idea of Judaism and packaging it through the art of language, which was one of his phenomenal skills. Using the art of language to package an idea of Judaism in a way that the contemporary young person can relate to, understand, and be inspired by. He was, I would say, in the last 20, 30 years, he was king of that. Taking an idea, a really deep idea, and finding a way to communicate it in a really deep, meaningful, inspiring way. In fact, I was listening this week to an interview that Rabbi Sachs had in 1990 when he was chief rabbi-elect on Desert Island. I don't even know what that was. Anyone familiar with what that is? It's a series of interviews. The interviewee would be asked what music they would take with them to a desert island. And it was like a way of music and interview and whatever. And the interviewer asked him, you're chief rabbi-elect and you're a pretty modern person with serious secular academic credentials. Will you consider changing the settings of Orthodox synagogue segregated seating and allow men and women to sit together for prayer? And I'm paraphrasing Rabbi Sachs' response. I don't remember the exact language that he used, but what resounded in my ears was he turned around to the interview and he effectively said, for me, prayer isn't about sitting with my wife and kids. It's about private communication with God. I don't need to sit with my wife and kids to pray. In fact, I think if you ask your average Orthodox rabbi, where's the ideal, or any rabbi, where's the ideal place to pray? The response you're going to get is synagogue. If you would have asked Rabbi Sachs where his ideal place to pray was, I suspect he might have told you that although according to Jewish law, you're supposed to go to the synagogue for certain technical reasons of communal prayer, but actually his ideal place to pray, as he was inspired by his connection with Chabad scholars when he studied for a year in Kfar Chabad, a village near Tel Aviv in the early 70s, he would probably tell you his ideal place to pray is probably in the fields in isolation, or like the Baal Shem Tov did, somewhere in the forest in solitude for 4, 5, 6 hours. I was reading also somewhere where he was writing about his mesmerization by discovering that on Shabbat afternoon in Kfar Chabad, there were people who prayed till 4, 5, 6 p.m. It wasn't because they were slow readers. It was because of a relationship with God that inspired their prayers. And he used this theme to explain that for him, prayer is not about asking for my wife and kids' needs. So I don't need to sit next to them when I pray. It's about a connection to God. So he used a question to really communicate what prayer really is, a relationship with God in a really deep, meaningful, uplifting way. So let's read this quote, and actually I'll come back to it at the end of the quote because it relates to it, to this theme as well, and how I'm trying to bring out this question about image of God. He would also say, so that's a quote from one of the sages of the Mishnah, "Beloved is man, for he was created in the image of God." By being created in the image of God, we have a special affinity to God. So there's an affinity to God in the way we are created. It is a sign of even greater love that has been made known to him, to the human being, that he was created in the image of God. As it is said, for in the image of God, he made man. In other words, the awareness that we are created in the image of God is a platform for the closeness between man and God. The unique closeness between man and God is realized by being created in the image of God. Which relates back to your points at the beginning about being kind, being good. You know, it says about, it's a quote from the Talmud, that we should learn from God how to behave, to be good. For example, we learned at the beginning of last week's parasha that God went to visit Abraham when he was sick. That's why he was sitting at the entrance to his tent waiting for guests, and God is standing next to him. In fact, the classic question of why he was sitting down if God is standing next to him. But then you can ask, hey, image, God standing next to him, what does that even mean? Which we'll come back to on the next screen. So the Talmud says that we should learn from God to visit the sick in the same way that God visits the sick, so should we. And that's a big part of being created in the image of God. Mahu chanun, chanun. Just like God is gracious, you should be gracious. Just like God is kind, you should be kind. God visits the sick, God cares for the poor, and the needy, you should also. Which is very much this theme of that there's this intrinsic connection between the human being and God. And it actually, if you dig deeper, it expresses this great longing and love to God. To come back to Rabbi Sachs, he actually, on that desert island interview, they asked him, what would you be the one song you'd take with you to the desert island? If you had one song to take with you to a desert island where you're going to be stranded. So he said a Chabad song based on the words of King David, Tzama lacha nafshi, my soul thirsts for you. So that one song that expresses the soul's desire to recognize this connection between God and the human being, and recognize that soulful connection is the one song he would take with him. And then he introduced the record, the song from a Chabad choir with music, and they had a whole bunch of other classic music that they were playing that he loved, which are all played by professional musicians and professional orchestras. And then they played this Chabad song. And in the lead up to it, he says he heard this song in Kfar Chabad, where late into the night they would they would sit at these Hasidic gatherings singing this song while drinking vodka. And then they played this song from a rubbish Haredi choir with the music absolutely horrendous. And when it finishes the clip, the interviewer says, "Better on the vodka, huh?" I find it hilarious. But yeah, you're playing on national radio these brilliant pieces of music by some of the top musical performers of the 1980s. And then you've got this Hasidic band who have no clue. But Rabbi Sachs is insistent that they play this. And actually, Chazan, actually, a cantor sang this song, a clip. I'm glad they didn't play the original music, but just sang a clip of it at the funeral on Sunday. All right, the connection to God. All right, let's get back to the main point of the theme. God as an image. So of course we know that you're not supposed to say that. In fact, the second of the 10 commandments, do not make an image for God. You should know, by the way, in Hebrew, how would you say the Hebrew word for image? Any Hebrew speakers who want to tell us? Guy, what word would you use for image?
Image.
Camera.
My mind's gone blank. I don't know.
Ben?
Wait, what?
Yeah, tmuna.
No, you're talking about picture. I want the word for camera.
Matzlema.
Matzlema. So the root word for image is tselem. Very interesting. Very interesting that the Hebrew word in the second of the 10 commandments prohibiting imagery is a different word. It's pesel.
Pesel. Oh, statue.
Which means a statue today. Yeah?
Yeah,
but it is the same thing. The point is an image. You're not allowed to give God an image. You're not allowed to attribute an image to God. So
yeah,
what's up with this? I've got 2 quotes, but there's so many quotes that you can find in the Tanakh. Quote number 1, Isaiah, and to whom do you compare God, and what likeness, demut, also another word, do you arrange? Or in the same chapter, now to whom will you compare me that I shall be equal? To damyuni, also the word demut. Effectively, I don't know who made up this original term, but it can certainly be used in this context. You cannot compare the human being to God in any way, shape, or form. Yeah, we all know that phrase, but how it relates to this theme more than any other is amazing. And yet we do it. For example, let's go to the next screen. When the Jewish people are leaving Egypt, they come to the sea. After the splitting of the sea, the Egyptians have chased them. They see this miraculous defeat of the Egyptians, and they sing a song, Az Yashir, which you'll hear chanted in any Sephardic synagogue if you know what you're doing. Az Yashir Moshe. And the song there reads, the Lord is a master of war. That's depicting imagery from the same Torah that says that you're not supposed to depict God with imagery. How does that work? Or the prophet Ezekiel. This is one of the most amazing bits of prophecy. You know, how do we know, how does Hollywood know that angels have wings? Let me elaborate on my question. There are no angels in Hollywood. Everyone knows that, right?
Yeah.
You get my pun? No angels in Hollywood?
Yeah.
So how on earth should Hollywood know that angels have wings? Everyone in Hollywood is corrupt. So there are no angels there. So nobody knows what an angel looks like in Hollywood. Except we all know that every hotel, even in Hollywood, has a Bible in the hotel room in a drawer. So maybe somebody in Hollywood was once sitting in their hotel room trying to think of an idea, and they pulled out the Bible, and that's how they discovered that angels have wings. Yeah, so let's read a little bit of a description from Ezekiel, because Ezekiel's descriptions are pretty elaborate. And above the expanse that was over their heads, like the appearance of a sapphire stone, was the likeness of a throne. And on the likeness of the throne was a likeness like the appearance of a man upon it above. Unbelievable imagery. How do you make sense of that?
How do you excuse that?
That's pretty mad. I mean,
this is a classic, by the way.
Some pretty powerful imagery there.
Go and look it up. It's actually a haftarah on. My brain is not working on one of the chagim. It's a haftarah on one of the chagim, maybe Sukkot, or one of the days of Sukkot, or maybe Shavuot. I think.
What do we learn out of that? that passage, Salman?
Oh, I don't have time now. I want to focus on the main point. Remind me another time. I don't mind. There's a huge amount of commentary on this.
I mean, it's cool, but I'm not quite picking up.
You've got to start studying serious Hasidic philosophy and Kabbalistic writing and see how it's interpreted. But what I want to focus on, and unfortunately I didn't have time to add a screen. I really wanted to add a screen here, okay? To really ground the point that I'm about to make. When this past Friday was the 5th anniversary of the passing of a Chabad rabbi in Morristown, New Jersey. Guy, I don't know if you're Rabbi Mendy. Did he study in New Jersey? I know he lived in New Jersey, but I don't know if he studied in yeshiva in New Jersey as well.
I think he studied in New York. I'm not sure though.
Okay. Anyway, he would know this rabbi as well. There was a rabbi in my yeshiva in New Jersey that I studied, and he was an absolute genius in every area of Jewish Jewish. Yeah. It's all right. We love a little bit of music to invigorate us. He was listening. You were trying to play that Desert Island disc to get that rubbish Hasidic melody to express the yearning of our soul to see the prophecy of Ezekiel in the flesh.
Very good.
But so this rabbi was an amazing scholar in Talmud and Jewish law and in Hasidic text. Phenomenal stuff. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the setup of seating in the yeshiva, but we all study all day long. You study with a study partner, so you never sit for your own study, or most of the days you don't do individual study much. So the setup of the room is that you've got small tables with a chair on either side, and you sit with the same book with somebody opposite you with the same book, and you study together. You read it together, and you study and analyze it. So for 1 year in New Jersey, when I was studying in this yeshiva in Morristown, New Jersey, my study partner was a guy who's for Hasidic philosophy in the morning for the first hour and a half of the day, was a guy who's now the director of Chabad of Hampstead Garden Suburbs. And our table was right next to this rabbi. We were the first table next to his table. And what we were studying, the text we were studying, is a really deep theme, which again, I should have had a screen to be able to illustrate the point, but I'll tell it to you verbally, and hopefully, despite the fact that most of us are visual learners to some extent, you'll still understand my point. God's facilitating of creation starts off with what is called a Hasidic text, Or Ein Sof, a never-ending light. There's a divine flow of energy, a divine light that God allows to become distorted, to evolve. When you were studying Darwin's evolution, we were studying the Kabbalists' evolution. Very, very different form of evolution. The evolution of divine energy that distorts divine energy enough that you end up with a stapler. Because if everything is created by God, how does the infinite light of divine energy become a physical object sitting on my desk? The answer that God facilitates a process of evolution that transforms this divine energy into physical energy. And it's a pretty intense process, which we study all sorts of random terms of different levels and worlds as we study Hasidic text. It's a pretty, when I was 14, 15, 16, I remember speaking to some of the rabbis and saying, I'm completely lost by this stuff. It's like, what is this? And they say, don't worry, you have to study for 2-3 years the terminology before you can make any sense of it, because it's so foreign to your way of thinking. You're suddenly learning about esoteric worlds called Atzilut and Berea, and you're like, where are they? Can I get there by booking a ticket with the Virgin Atlantic? Maybe Richard Branson's, maybe he can take us there one day. And then after a while, you realize that only these rabbis can take you there. Or Rabbi Sachs, while he's singing Tzama L'Chanashi. No Richard Branson flight would ever take you to these worlds. But so there's this distortion of divine energy as it flows down. And this is a text that we're studying with all of these different terminology of different levels and different realms and different systems, and how this energy goes from being part of the essence of God's energy into a physical world where you look around and you don't see divine energy, you see yourself. If you realize divine energy in your room, if this stuff was revealed to you, you wouldn't be able to be. In fact, there are Hasidic texts that analyze part of our morning prayers that say that some of the angels are created in such a way where the moment they come into existence, they're so aware of divine energy and their irrelevance that they disappear before they even formulate. They can't exist. So this is the stuff that we're learning. And I'm sitting one day and I notice out of the corner of my eye, a few of these students walking up to the rabbi. They want him to review a diagram that they've made of the text that we're of the different levels that we're studying about. At the top of the diagram, they had written in Hebrew the word atzmut, which means the essence of God, the oneness of God. And they've written it in nice calligraphy. I think they even, this is going back over 20 years, but if my recollection is correct, I think they even used a few different colors to make it look fancy. And they gave it a bit of a calligraphy style border. God at the top of the page, and then the flow of energy with all the levels that they're studying about. And they walk over to the rabbi, they put it down in front of him, and they ask him to review it for them. And my heart sunk into my stomach because I was concerned for them. I knew he was a really gentle, kind guy, and I knew he would be diplomatic, but I knew he would have to use the opportunity to explain to them that you never write God's essence at the top of a chart. Even if you want to chart the stuff you're learning, you can't put God at the top of that chart. You've got the flow, you've got the systems, fine, you want to study them, so you're going to chart them, but the essence of God can't be given imagery. So the essence of God doesn't belong at the top of the piece of paper. So I was really curious to see how he's going to react. And I was feeling really awkward and uncomfortable because I knew that they were showing an obvious lack of awareness of something, but that he would have to be diplomatic and kind to them. And he looks at them in his really kind, gentle way. If you made a mistake like that in a seminar, I'm convinced the seminar leader would look at you and say, what a load of rubbish. Yeah? And perhaps rightfully so. He looks at them and in a really kind, gentle way, he says to them, everything you've done on the page is all accurate, but you never put God. He had a really sweet way of speaking. You never put God at the top of the page. This scene has never left my mind. I think of it often. It was very powerful for me and how he communicated with such kindness and compassion while correcting their mistake. The point is, I'm using the story to illustrate the point, that when you talk about imagery, you're not talking about the essence of God. You can't attribute imagery to the essence of God. You can only attribute imagery to God as God relates to creation, as God interacts with the flow of Or Ein Sof, with the flow of divine light towards this evolution of divine light as it flows towards creation. Then you can give certain structure, you can give imagery, you can give depiction, you can give definitions. For example, the Jewish people at the sea, we've got it right here. Jewish people at the sea, they're being attacked by the Egyptians. God has to manifest in a form of a warrior to protect them. So God takes on a warrior form. I know modern historians would like to claim that the whole image of God is God as warrior and that it's a very manly warrior type of image. In Judaism, we say, no, that historian doesn't really understand Jewish philosophy. We depict God as warrior when God has to take on that depiction in order to defeat the Egyptians. On day-to-day life, we depict God as being kind and generous, as Ben accurately said at the beginning of the session. But really, at its core, God is the absence of anything that we can ever imagine, as the prophet Isaiah said on the previous screen. What Ezekiel and the text from Exodus is doing here is telling us about the flow of energy and the relationship of God with creation and with us. It's not defining God. So if I want to make an image of God, that would be wrong. And that's why it's prohibited in the second commandment. If I want to define how God interacts with me, I can say God is kind and generous. What you going to do about it? How are you going to learn from that? Okay. That's in a nutshell. I'm going to take you to two more screens just to summarize and wrap it up. I've been focusing on point number 7, which I'm going to come to, but there are a whole bunch of classic commentaries that discuss, as you probably could well imagine, a whole bunch of classic commentaries that discuss this question and analyze it. Those who say that God molded man with a certain image and that became the image of God. In other words, it's not depicting an image of God. It's depicting the image with which God created creation, and that becomes God's image. And it's also the image of the angels that God has also created alongside him. So if you remember, I asked a question at the beginning, who is God speaking to when he says, let us create man in our image? The other angelic creatures that also have, to some extent, this divine image. There's another commentary that explains that, but I guess also built onto the same one, unique feature of the human being. These are different quotes and different commentaries, but you see a lot of overlap as well. Intellectual being, our ability to think beyond ourselves. All other animals, even the kindest, most compassionate animals that we know that science tells us now have feelings, only have feelings within their own natural survival instincts, but don't know how to think beyond their own immediate needs. Judaism says that the human being really has the ability to think beyond our own immediate needs. Intellectual, which we can, Sinai scholars, I have a whole thing on that in the Sinai scholars course. I wish I had time to go through that, but I want to wrap up. Intellectual prowess, we saw that very clearly in the text. Being created in the image of God means to control, rule over, and transform creation. We have the power to burn down the whole Amazon and destroy the whole Amazon, which no other human being, no other creation has the ability to do other than human beings. But equally, we have the power to build 2 new Amazons, which also no other creation has the ability to do. So we have intellectual prowess. Creativity, to be able to manage, as I said, rule is a very positive thing in Judaism if you know how to manage it. Leadership, also, same thing. And number 7, which is the one that we are exploring towards the end of today's session, holy spiritual divine feature. And I'm going to finish off with the next screen, which I hope I don't get you lost on because I'm missing some images on this to really elaborate on the point. That whole theme of divine energy that I spoke about earlier, Hasidic philosophy says, based on Kabbalistic writing, that it's a system of 10 sephirot. I don't know if you've ever seen this Kabbalistic chart of the 10 sephirot. It's a diagram of 10 levels. Says Hasidic philosophy that says Kabbalistic writing, that every single stage in divine evolution until physical creation consists of multiple replicas of this system of 10. The last level of each 10 is what leads to the next 10. In fact, that was a big part of the diagram that these guys were showing this rabbi that I described to you earlier. This replicating this continuous system of 10 over and over again, which are called in Hasidic terminology 10 sephirot. Says Hasidic philosophy that human beings, uniquely of all physical creations, are the only physical creation that is actually created with these 10 faculties, of which they consist of 2 different levels. The first level being 3 stages of intellect, of intellectual process. Actually, the word Chabad is actually an abbreviation for these 3 levels of intellect, which I'm not going to go into now. I think I've spoken about that other lunch on that, and I'll come back to it another time. Again, I'm sure we'll have chance to talk about it, but that's actually what the term Chabad is. Chabad is not just a really nice place where you can get a free dinner in Bangkok or meet a really cool rabbi in Islington. It's actually an acronym for a really deep philosophy. So that's the 3 levels of intellect, and then the 7 levels of emotion. Says Hasidic philosophy, animals are not created in this system, and therefore their behaviors respond to their emotions because that's their natural setup. It's an automatic response. They're not in control of behaviors. You can't turn around to an animal and say, I want you to fundamentally control your behaviors to become something different. You might be able to train it with treat to manipulate its behaviors for temporary, for a short while, but ultimately you can never get an animal to change the system. The operating system is always going to change the same. The human being, we can change. We don't have to be controlled by our behaviors, by our learned behaviors. Any therapist will tell you that a key thing in good therapy is learning how to change learned behaviors. And you start thinking to yourself, but nobody walks into a zoo and says, let's get these creatures to sit with a therapist and learn how to change behaviors. And the problem is not just because of the language barrier, it's because nobody thinks it's necessary. If a monkey behaves like a monkey, everyone's content. You get frustrated when the 37-year-old monkey refused to do the tricks that it was doing when it was 2. If a 37-year-old lecturer started doing 2-year-old tricks in a seminar, you'd all walk out on him. Why aren't you fascinated? Because we human beings are expected to develop and enhance our behaviors based on intellect. We have a different processing system. And says Hasidic philosophy, actually, that's the way we're supposed to work. That's the way we're supposed to function. To be created in the image of God means to make sure that our brain is telling our emotions what to do and not vice versa. And I want to finish off, it's a little bit of a stressful time, wondering when you can go home next, whether you get arrested on the train. I saw somebody posting a news item claiming that your insurance is not valid if you drive somewhere which is illegal. And a whole bunch of people almost ate the poster up for lunch. And probably rightfully so. I mean, the fake news that's going around now, unbelievable.
Yeah.
Your insurance would be invalidated because you drove home against the law. I mean, can you imagine an insurance company trying to make that argument in court?
Absolutely.
Field it. It's a stressful time, and you're wondering how you're supposed to get your head around it, and it is hard. But you have to remember that a lot of the way you're reacting is behaviors, is emotions. And you can control your behaviors. It doesn't mean you're going to control the decisions that you make, change the decisions that you're going to make. You might make the same decision that I'm going to go home because I can't handle this. You might even make the decision I'm going to break the rule, and you're going to come to the conclusion that it's the right thing to do for your health. And it might very well be the right thing to do for your health. It's not just Dominic Cummings who's going to break the rules because it's the right thing to do. But ultimately, remember that you're in control of your behaviors and your emotions. So don't let it play you up. But don't let it play you up and get you down. Manage it with your mind. And if you do that, you're going to be in control. That I want to go back to the beginning now, that thing of rule over the whole creation. If we can't rule over ourselves and our own emotions, how on earth do we expect to rule over the whole of creation? And that's the divine ability that we've been bestowed with. To be able to control our own emotions, and by extension of that, the whole world, and use what God gave us to be able to make the world a better place. L'chaim, on my coffee. All right, I'm going to stop the recording, and then you can. How do I stop the recording? I don't know. Stop recording. Do you want to stop recording? If yes, you will receive